Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for some. Happy that you are here to join us with this conversation, very important conversation about moving institutions from data literacy to data fluency. My name is Darcy Hardy. I'm the founder and chief strategist with the Hardy Group, and we're bringing these fireside chats to our community in order to help answer some of the questions people have, especially in this case, moving forward with data. Anyway, we're happy you're here. We're recording this. You could share this with your colleagues afterward and go back and review it. Just FYI, the Hardy Group was founded in order to help institutions with their primarily online, but also data literacy, AI, all the things that we're dealing with right now from a consulting standpoint. So my only plug here is that if you need any help with any of these things, please go to our website and set up a chance to converse with us about whatever you're working on. But with that, that's all I'm saying. I'm going to turn it over to Rob Robinson, who will introduce today's speakers and start a conversation. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, we're excited about this conversation. And the reason that we selected this topic today is because the results of a simple little LinkedIn poll that we had done a month or so ago put this topic at the top of the list, beating out other hot issues in higher ed, including AI, which seems to have taken a lot of oxygen out of the room. So we have great speakers with us today, and I'm really thrilled that all three of them said yes to joining this conversation. Szymon Machajewski, which his name is misspelled on that slide, Ellen Wagner, and Pete Smith. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves here, and then we'll start this conversation. Just kind of let us know who you are. Let's start with you, Ellen.
Anyway, hi. I'm very glad to be here today. It's nice to be with you all. I have been actively involved in the data analytics conversion to the way that we do our work since about 2008, when we found that this was going to become more of a national public policy awareness issue. And at the time, I was really just focusing on things related to student success. So after getting very involved in the student success for the last, number of years, since that period of time, one of the reoccurring patterns that I have seen, whether you're working on big projects, whether I've been working on big projects, or watching what happens when initiatives dealing with data are introduced into institutions, is that we really focus a lot on the innovation of what the data are doing. But we forget that bringing people along on that particular innovation journey is really, really tough. And that every place I have ever seen these initiatives take off, the place that they tend to stumble and fall is when we expect our people to be able to keep up with what we are saying on the innovation front. And I'm not quite sure how many times I saw that on individual projects, but the need for us to figure out ways to align our absolute obsession with moving ahead in ways that we've never done before, with remembering that we have a very large tail, a wagon behind this dog. And if we don't do something about that, I think we're going to continue to find ourselves in some really uncomfortable positions.
Thank you.
That's my happiness for the morning.
Yeah, good. Szymon.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Ellen. So my name is Szymon Machajewski, and I lead at the University of Illinois Chicago a group that takes care of academic technology, and data is a big part of our lives, especially learning analytics. I also lead the EDUCAUSE student analytics community group, and we invite you to join there and help us really share our collective minds and our ideas about how to make students successful with data. And I would say digital dexterity is kind of the main theme that we see over the years, where data literacy is part of it, but really understanding how digital dexterity can be learned, and it can be mastered and can be passed on to new generations as well. That's really a big topic of our work there at UIC right now.
Thank you. Pete.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Pete Smith at University of Texas at Arlington. It's good to see so many familiar faces. I've trained myself not to say so many old familiar faces. Some of us are more timeless than others, Rob, yourself included. At the University of Texas at Arlington, I served for 10 years as the Chief Analytics Officer, and then with the arrival of Senate Bill 475, I became the Chief Analytics and Data Officer here at the university. So I have the good fortune of a group of 35 BI and data analysts in an office we call University Analytics. And so I think the themes we talk about every day, we are confronting probably more at the enterprise level, as Ellen talked about. How do we take a billion-dollar enterprise and think about the role of data, that well overused phrase, data-driven? What does that mean, and how do we do that? What does it mean to grow a campus and its people in this area? I'm also a faculty member. I was not really a quant person early in my life. I'm a language faculty member. So the second battle I fight every day is making sure that my qualitative background is up to speed with all of the latest quantitative things that are going on as well. So lots of good discussions, hope to bring value today.
I appreciate that. Darcy just reminded me that I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Rob Robinson. I am a chief strategist with the Hardy Group, also the COO, which functionally means in our company doing the stuff that Darcy doesn't want to do. So, but we've started this group to really continue working with some of the greatest clients that we've ever worked with, and helping institutions think through a number of different issues. Many of them focus on the online space. So I want to start this conversation because the terms data literacy and data fluency have different connotations for different people. And so what I'd like to do is go back through our panelists and ask them kind of what's your personal definition of data literacy? How would you assess somebody's data literacy or fluency? Let's start with Pete.
So when I came to this job, I came with sort of the standard definition: can an individual consume and communicate with data? And there are lots of versions of that old definition. Can they read and write with data? What does that basic skill set look like? As our thinking about this field and this definition has grown over the years, I'm really intrigued by this notion of data fluency, and I think this will come out as we all share our definitions. The definitions of data fluency, which add a bit more of the analytic piece to it, the visual piece to it, sound to me like what I would call data science. I'm out on what I call the data science market, hiring data scientists, and honestly, this more advanced level of skill set, whether individual or at the group level, sounds to me very much like, I'll throw the field out there, what data science would say data science is.
Thanks. Simon.
Yeah, I think literacy, of course, implies very foundational knowledge and skills in reading, perhaps being informed. However, fluency would imply more abilities to see what's not there immediately. So understanding potential biases and limitations of the data sources, ability also to create, say, data visualizations or create data stories. And I think it's important to note that any literacy programs really suffer a little bit from stigma. In other words, especially in higher education, when you're telling PhDs that they need to attend a literacy program, it immediately questions their qualifications. And they may be very advanced in medical fields or otherwise. And renaming these programs to fluency programs by itself has great value.
Thanks. That's good insight. Ellen, what are your thoughts? You're muted, baby. There you go.
There I go. I'm realizing as I'm listening to Simon and Peter talking that I come at this from a very different part of the value chain these days. After having spent some time in academics and dealing with more of that faculty and then the academic affairs perspectives around data, I left higher ed before we got into the big data sort of motion. And at that point, I was working more with public policy organizations. We ran a grant program to get people started on working on this. And I guess what I'm realizing is and we've mentioned it at the very beginning of this, the range of things that we're considering about the fluency to, as Pete was talking about, the data science part of our life. I worry a lot about people not necessarily being able to look at fairly simple questions and answer them when the information that they might be looking at is right there in a system or in a plan that there hasn't been the awareness of putting this together, because we're not talking about this so much as a research endeavor as it is a problem-solving methodology that people need and I look at it in the workflow. And really, I guess the work that I've been doing for the last number of years has been much more with, well, usually with academic, but increasingly now corporate types of training teams trying to figure out how to help people make the better decisions with the data so that they can at least have a picture of what it is that they're looking at, that can identify patterns. So I'm finding that the type of people that I'm working now outside of the institutions are really almost at, I'm a little surprised to say it, but we're having to go back to really start reminding people about the quantification of things that actually will help us make better decisions. So for me, it's about decision making.
That's great. You know, a couple of things that came up. Pete, you were talking about, you know, being able to hire data scientists and that sort of connection between data fluency and data science. The vast, not all, but many folks in our institutions, employees, faculty, students themselves, are terrified of these words themselves.
Yes.
Data, anything. They're just like, I don't do math. I don't do math. So I'm curious your thoughts about how we can soften the edges because it is such a critical skill. We need to make sure that we're all increasing our data fluency. But many folks don't even want to take the first step down that path because they're terrified of it. Go ahead, Ellen.
I'm about to burst because we never tell them why, because we tell them how, and we tell them about the big picture and sort of like the hill that we must climb and the momentum that we're going to gather and all these really huge things, which we all will agree with because we all agree with it. But we never really talk about why it matters to them, why it matters in their practice, why they can be better at what they do. And I'm realizing, you know, the more time I have spent exploring AI types of things that we're going to have to address within higher education, the more I am realizing that our absolute requirement of focusing on this human in the loop, it's going to be hard for us because we don't necessarily want to do that, because people are harder. People are harder than math. They really are.
I love a non-quantified view. I love it. Actually, I'll build on that. So I'll tell you how that's exhibited in my enterprise. So we were getting ready to do a large scale inventory. We really wanted to get a baseline. Where were we as a data-driven culture? And I can talk about that process at a later point. And of our roughly 5,000 employees, we identified about 20% that we thought had in their day-to-day jobs more than the average amount, if you will, of touching data, creating data, using data, presenting data, consuming data, supporting administrators or being administrators, making decisions with data. And that took really almost 1,000 different forms. A data creator in our Office of Admissions who was making decisions every day about how transcript data goes into a system. It was someone in our Division of Academic Success who was looking at that transcript data and making decisions to help shape how we might think about our upcoming FTIC class. It was administrators and deans and their offices and staff who were thinking about the educational journey those students were on. It was my business officers who were thinking about the dollars and cents of it all, right? And some were surprised to find they were on the list when we then included them in this national benchmarking activity, and that meant a survey, that meant a focus group. They might even have had an interview as part of this. I'd say a good third of them wrote back to me and said, I think you've emailed me in mistake. Why am I involved in this process? And a little bit of digging would help us find out that they were a very important data creator on campus or a very important data user on campus. And it's not exhibited in their job titles. It's not exhibited in their job descriptions. These are some of the things we learned. It may or may not be seen as a skill of value by their manager. Are they given chances to form community and learn? Are they given chances to upskill, to use the common word? Are their data activities valued in their day-to-day work? These are the sorts of things where, to Ellen's point, they may not even consider themselves to be part of this crowd at the start, but at the beginning, we found we have a lot of work to do to bring them into that crowd and value those skills. And we do use those words, but yeah, those words are terrifying. I agree.
Yeah.
I wonder if consideration needs to be given here to this expression being data-driven, because we've had some negative experiences with that. Ellen earlier talked about a dog wagging its tail. Well, sometimes data piece can waggle the whole dog, and the problem is that it may be actually a mistake. So we really prefer today to talk about being data informed, and that's where the fluency is so needed, to be able to see when it's appropriate to be data informed, but then have also other sources of information. I think we live in culture where people not only have their own opinions, but bring their own facts, right? And so in general, as a culture, we have grown suspicious of data and what people are trying to say through it. There's a book I wanted to share. It's from 1954 by Darrell Huff, How to Lie with Statistics. And if you are on the journey to kind of deepen knowledge, that's a great starting point, because if you look on television and you see how graphs are presented, how data is communicated, there is such a wide area of tricks that can be used to make your point, to get a decision moved in certain way with just a little bit of data.
Yeah, that's a really important point. As a side note, when I was over the last few years, I was teaching at the graduate level some courses in analytics and how to use them in higher education. And we would always, I would start with the assertion that I want them to understand all these concepts that we're talking about in this class as they go into the workforce, but they all apply to our individual lives. We are all a product of an algorithm almost constantly. And so my question to you is how this idea of moving from data literacy or illiteracy to literacy to fluency, how can we better communicate and provide individuals with the right set of questions or tools such that they're not completely terrified or skeptical, but what I see more often is just blindly, because the algorithm said it, it must be true. So what thoughts do you have about how we can help better arm our users?
I'll pick up on Simon's point. I have to tell you, my high school statistics course, and that was a few decades ago, I actually brought that book in, and it was one of my first experiences with statistics, so it was good to hear that title again. It reminded me, I think there's a quote inside of the front cover, right? There are three kinds of lies: damn lies, and statistics in that book for the first time in print. We come at it from curiosity. I've found that the critical act, and if we as universities make critical thinking part of what we do, I don't think this is any exception. When we think about our top-end data analysts, all the way down to someone who's touching, using, consuming data in their daily work, we want a critical thought frame. We want curiosity. So one of the questions we frequently ask, this also goes to Simon's point, is what are we not seeing in the data? What's not here? Did we measure what was simple and easy to measure? Have we measured that in a way that is actually accurate and true to reality? But oftentimes that bigger context is what we miss. And Ellen made this point as well. So I think that analytical piece that we as universities see as so central to our domain has to play a role here. The critical piece, the curiosity piece. As we form communities, as we bring people together on campus, that's the frame we start with. We find, certainly in the university context, that's well accepted. I have to tell you, Simon, that on the business side, data-driven is still a phrase they use. I have to say I can't quite move away from it, but I much prefer data-informed. You're exactly correct.
Ellen, what are your thoughts?
And I'm not muted. Woohoo. I guess for me, the funny part about this, I'm finding that when I'm working with the people with my clients these days, what I'm helping them do is to come up with messaging briefs. Because telling the story of why people need to be doing what they're doing is, we assume that because we're smart people, we get it. And we assume because we're all on the same education team that we see the same things. But what's been really interesting for me and the place, because I am finding it's like, how do you get people to change? That the amount of just giving them the framework of whatever, it's almost like giving people the script. If you're going to expect them to work on some of these things, let them know the part that they play and the important part that they have to play. Because really, I've watched teams literally flip from being pretty dysfunctional into being much better able to pull together when they just simply understood their part of what they were doing. Now that's fairly tactical concern, and I'm dealing not so much with where the future is going as it is, there's a problem to be solved. And so what we're trying to do now is to figure out how to get the people who have to solve the problem to the point of understanding how much agency they actually have in being able to do this. So I'm really appreciating hearing, actually, I'm really happy to hear that some of the issues that are going on in Simon and Peter's worlds are a little bit higher level than some of the stuff that I tend to see, because really I'm just finding that people don't understand what they're supposed to do, and giving them their script is a really important part of it, at least getting them the confidence to be able to move to some of the next levels.
I think that's important. Simon, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that we have to kind of acknowledge the human decision-making process is flawed in many ways. In other words, when you go to buy a car, you make the emotional decision, and then you collect the evidence to support it. And that happens across, picking a mate or otherwise, and all kinds of things get in the way there. So that's what we see in business too, that by the time people reach out for data is to somehow get evidence for the decision that they want already to make. And I fully support what Peter was talking about, exploration and having curiosity, that we have to help folks start from there. And there are a few things that can be done. By pairing data experts with non-experts, we can help to maybe pollinate some of those interests and ideas, encouraging interdisciplinary efforts and participation on projects. Maybe establishing mentorships can be quite useful. Thinking about recognition programs, that's another way that can lead people to leave a certain path and maybe pursue a different one. But also something as simple as including data literacy expectations in job descriptions, right? So right from the beginning, a person knows that they need to maybe keep qualifying in this area. But there are other things that can be done, such as creating communities of practice, right? So again, at the EDUCAUSE Student Success community, we try to encourage each other to consider new ideas, because what we don't know, right, it's the hardest question to ask for. So I think there are quite a few things that can be done to improve the culture around data literacy.
Yeah, and I think that's critical. It is very much, as Ellen pointed out earlier, at base, a lot of this is change management work, right? Helping people rethink their relationship with data, their relationship with the tools that they're using, but also going back to this idea of making sure that everybody understands why they're doing it, right? And it's not, if the output of an algorithm says X, you must do Y. That's really, it's much more of a starting point. Let's talk about what X represents. And particularly in higher education, I find one of the most effective ways to bring people into this conversation is to, tell stories with the data. Make sure that they remember that at base, every one of those digits or outputs represents a student or a student population. And that's why we're doing the work in higher education, right? Because that's what keeps us in these jobs is our students. I want to take it down just a little bit level, and let's talk about some of the tools that can be used, approaches, when communicating with data, when telling a story with data. How important are visualization tools in your, doing the work that you do, and how familiar do you think your folks are with interpreting some of the visualizations? Anybody can go.
I'll jump in. Honestly, that puts us into the art side of arts and crafts in the sense that over the years in my office, we've had individuals who have very strong visual skills. In one case, we actually took a visual designer who wasn't a data scientist in any real sense, and had the good fortune to bring him onto the team, and he really schooled all of us in the art of what he did as a visual designer, from data storytelling to even just the smallest bits of, the piece of paper we hand to a guest who's visiting our office trying to figure out what the heck it is that we do. How do we represent that visually, as opposed to just data outputs? That mix of skills is rarer than we would like it to be. It is very, very hard, I will tell you, at the enterprise level to find highly skilled data visualization people. They're a hot commodity because they bring, if you will, the two worlds to their work. And to this day, we talk lovingly about all the work that our graphic person did and schooled us in, and the awareness he brought us to. In essence, there was a visual literacy that he trained us in, that we paired with data literacy. The other thing it really taught me, and this is a lesson I see every day, and that's just one example, is how much data literacy and data science are team sports. We can never really assume that any one person is going to bring the now increasingly wide variety of skills, and I think visualization is a perfect example of that.
Great.
I've been approaching competency development in sort of the world that used to be known more as instructional design with a small I, small d, because I appreciate all the subtleties of how this practice of creating content experiences and everything has sort of branched into all kinds of different ways of doing it. But what's been interesting for me is in the last 5 years or so, there's been this push toward learning engineering. And ironically, as somebody who's been in this field of instructional design for quite a number of years, where we always did the analyses and we always did the sort of background, and you always had to do some measure of data. I think the thing that I thought was missing was that we had this whole addition of new tools to use, because now data is just sort of, it's like it's the exhaust systems of all these platforms that we use. But what's been interesting to me is realizing that there's been a shift away from really looking at a lot of people who are doing the construction of the materials that we're using in our classrooms have been sort of removed from the data conversations. And it's a concern for mine, because while I'm listening to the team sport notion has come up in learning engineering very specifically, because this is where they're combining the learning sciences people with the design people in the middle, with the engineers at the end, to make sure that there is a throughput process on the things that we produce for content. Embedded in this entire process is the use of analytical skills and using data skills and doing all kinds of the forecasts and building the tools. I'm curious, and this is really a question back at you all, because what I'm hearing is a recognition on all of our parts that we've got lots and lots of skill development that we all have to be doing right now, to the point where sometimes I'm hearing that, the focus on what we can do with the tools, and wondering what is going on in the communities on campuses right now that we're seeing. They're helping us squeeze that gap a little bit better, because I don't think it's about learning engineering. I don't think it's necessarily about, I think it's more important to break things down into what we're trying to actually get all of us to do, like be more competent in solving problems, because we can use our tools better. So sorry for the long introduction, but since I have everyone here and I find myself in the middle of so many of these types of questions, and I just sort of listen, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Simon, Pete, we can actually open this up to other folks. If anybody has a comment, feel free to drop it in the chat or just come off mute. We're a small group.
I wanted to add that what I'm hearing Ellen say about learning engineering, really when it comes to visualizations, there is engineering involved. And like Pete said, there's art involved. So now we're talking about overlapping very important skills. And so we're at that intersection of these skills is that story of the data. But we have to acknowledge that visualizations are very helpful, because They can stimulate that curiosity we talked about and deeper exploration, especially if you can manipulate the filters and see the data differently. But also visualizations can help non-technical audiences in whatever field really get the point quicker. So I think visualizations have a great role. And of course, in higher ed, we also have to acknowledge that visualizations require some natural abilities that may make them not very accessible to, say, people with low vision or otherwise. So there are many elements here that might even put visualizations in a very great area of being a candidate to be AI process. In other words, we want to do what OpenAI does, where they point the phone towards visualization and then have some intelligence explaining what it is you're looking at and what are the patterns in the data. So we sometimes maybe miss the point that to really take advantage of a visualization, you need a level of the data literacy to be able to tell the story to yourself. And that's maybe where some of the new technologies might be helpful.
I would pick up on your point, Ellen, as we bring these teams of highly expert people together. Increasingly, I like to celebrate the expertise that people bring. I'm going to go back to that. I call him a graphic designer. He really was an artist. And I see Harriet Watkins is with us, so I'm even going to mention him by name. Chuck Pratt brought to our team. Many of you may have known him or worked with him. It quickly became clear to me that the expertise and artistry he had, we could develop an appreciation for, but he likely wasn't going to train us as a group to bring skills anywhere near his. What we could do was celebrate his expertise, much as he celebrated ours, because the message he gave right back to, say, a talented instructional leader like Harriet was that he didn't have her expertise, but the team of experts, if you will, was really something to celebrate, and I would draw strength from that. I think the modern version of that question is communities of practice. You know, how do communities of practice work in a way that values individuals and values their expertise, but also does have some learning transfer, to use that old phrase, in the mix as well. That would be ideal. I am never going to be Chuck Pratt, but we can bring our skills and bring our abilities as communities, as teams. I think you would agree with me, Ellen, that's not a bad thing.
No, I think it's a great thing. Because ultimately, none of us have the individual capacity to do all of this work and to think about all the things that must be there. And if we don't have some way of being able to, I mean, in the last 6 months, I've spent more time doing ontological research, which is a bit of a surprise because I just didn't think this was going to happen. But trying to understand relationships among some of the concepts and constructs that we are talking about right now, especially for those of us in positions of trying to guide other people to a new way of their thinking. It's not our thinking. This is hard. And trying to come up with ways of articulating this, for me, I mean, I know that this is a bit of a stretch from data fluency and how we were starting to talk about it, but it's not really.
No,
because these are completely new and different ways of taking the information that we may have had available to us, and given conditions is having to think about it in really different ways and with different tools to help us co-create. I'm excited about this, but I think that the more I have been diving into this and understanding what it's going to take for us to be more fluent, it's going to be exciting times. And I'm really glad that we have technology tools to help us.
You know, I wonder if one of the areas that can help is practice. In other words, we're talking about skills, and these, of course, can be theoretical, but especially with visualizations, practice is very important. So it's okay to fail, right? How open are we to failure in our departments where the visualization perhaps did not do the right thing, but lessons are learned? I wanted to share, we talk about communities of practice. I wanted to share with you a tool called Napkin AI that helps you to just put in a text, an article, and then highlight a paragraph, and it will create visualizations out of it.
Cool.
And it can really help in building presentations, but even you start thinking about paragraphs and text as data, and then you can visualize them to make the point. So it's just practicing and really getting your hands on and being open to people bringing visualizations maybe more often. And again, at least in higher education, I think we're very failure averse. We want to be all about learning, but we give grades immediately for what's done. Whereas innovation really requires quite a bit of failure.
I really like that approach, and thank you for dropping that. If you don't have the chat box open, Simon dropped that link in the chat. I wanted to, there's always been, to my mind, a problem in complex organizations, and universities are absolutely complex organizations, and that is multiple sources of truth, right? So the data can be whatever the data are, but it's going to represent different things to different people. And so part of this idea of data literacy and data fluency is being able to engage in that conversation. You know, anecdotally, if you go to an institutional research head and ask them how many FTE we had last semester, the first chunk of the response is a whole bunch of caveats. and then but the correct response is, what do you want to do with that data, right? So being able to, and the problem of multiple source of truth is not going to go away, because different areas of our organizations source their data differently. It's not all coming from the same place, and so they may wind up with variant numbers, and the importance of that variance varies. You know, for an IR person who's reporting to the state, then our FTE count needs to be decimally precise, and it tells a story semester after semester. But if I just simply need to know some trends, I don't need to be decimally precise, right? I need to know directionality. So it's really this idea of, how do we make folks aware that their truth may be different than my truth when it comes to numbers and data? I'd love your thoughts on that. I know, Pete, I mean, you live this every day, right?
I was going to say that I've got 3 cases this morning. It is my life. I've been thinking a lot about how data culture and IT culture are different. Frequently, we think about those two as something of a monolith. And one of the ways I think data culture thinks differently is the notions of multiple sources of truth is not foreign to us. When Dean presents in my office and says, I have 3 reports, one that says I have 13,800 students, this one says I have 15,200, this one says I have 11,400, which one is correct? And I say, likely all 3 of them are, given certain timings, certain definitions. Let's talk about assumptions. Let's talk about how the data were pulled. We have these notions of single source of truth. We have these notions like system of record, which essentially derive from 1950s, 1960s IT systems architecture that honestly, I think we do need to examine critically. We can have multiple truths simultaneously. It adds complexity to the complex system. It doesn't make that dean's life any easier that he has 3 numbers. One is his financial model, one is his state-funded students, one are the numbers of students that are actually in the seats in his classrooms that his faculty are teaching. All are true, all are valid for someone at some time, and barring any just mishaps in pulling the data, all likely do have some validity. And so these notions of single source of truth. That said, we are working very hard to make sure that we bring those contextual information with the data, so that somebody seeing 3 reports also sees the caveats you mentioned, Rob, right up front, and can begin to think about them with those caveats. And there is a never-ending source. If you have 2 reporting systems or 3 offices that all put out data in varying ways, that's just a fact of life in complex systems.
I wonder if part of approaching this topic is really looking at the word, the truth, right? That we need to be more scientists about it, in that these are observations, and there are certain conditions to these observations. So very often we deal with survivorship bias, and what that means is that data was collected from individuals who were at the privileged position of providing the data. Just a quick note that this idea was really developed during Second World War, when airplanes were coming back in the battle for England, and they noticed that the damage on the planes were in very specific spots. And so they would start reinforcing these areas where the damage was noted. Well, of course, what are all the planes that never came back, right? That's the damage that you really wanted to reinforce. So we see this all the time in higher education, where we might take survey results and we provide that as a source of truth, but it so happens that only specific people fill out surveys and specific people want to share this data. So we then have a population bias. You might hear sometimes 82% of our faculty liked this or that. Well, no, it's 82% of faculty who took the survey. And by the way, what's the N value, right? Well, it was
Right.
15 faculty. So discovering that the truth is really very difficult and should be looked at differently. And I would say that the idea of the truth really requires triangulation, right? So multiple sources of truth help us to triangulate this idea of the truth. And having reports that are different will help you to really see what's going on. And I would encourage another book called The Range by David Epstein, who talks about generalists. And so now you have people who come from other departments who bring their own reports and observations, and being able to have these generalist skills today should be valued a lot more than someone who is a specialist who knows the data so well that actually cannot see beyond it. So I think these are skills that we definitely see in development.
Ellen, thoughts?
I've been reflecting on a very long conversation I had just at the end of last week about how facts are not true necessarily. And the conversation that went on around that it's just simply a fact, it's just simply something that can be verified or not. And that being, that level of precision is it's really important for those of us who are trying to figure out how to have these background conversations. I guess even as we're talking today, I'm realizing that there are multiple parts of this big conversation when we're looking at fluency, because the fluency being pointed in the right direction, having the information that we need to know that we are on the right path, that it has been verified, and that it is that we've got legitimate information guiding what we're thinking about, but understanding that that's not necessarily the process through which people take the information and use it. And I think for me, just this conversation has been excellent because it is reminding me of a couple of places where, well, I've been playing enough around it to recognize that there are some opportunities here. And now that I'm hearing about how much maybe we could be doing, I'm actually getting myself a little bit energized about diving into this sort of this gray zone of figuring out how to grabbing the change management part of this much more actively, really, and understanding that data is only part of the point. Being fluent with the data is going to help the rest of us help everybody else make decisions with it.
Exactly right.
I wondered,
Yeah, what was it? Stephen Colbert coined the term truthiness. I think that gets to what the nugget that we have here. I want to stop. I want to pause. I'm gonna right at the end. I'm going to ask for closing thoughts from our panelists, but I would love to hear your thoughts from the attendees. Do you have any questions for these folks? Additional comments? I always love learning from people around these kind of conversations. And I would bet none of you are particularly shy. Yeah, just come off mute if you want to make a comment.
Hey, it's Brenda from Quality Matters. Nice to see you all. It really struck me, one of the things that you were talking about with the person who was the artist, right, who was able to come in and synthesize a lot of information. And I think that we see these kinds of shortages today because of the cuts to funding in the arts, because people are not being taught problem solving skills. Speaking as a person with an art degree, that is, and I meet so many people in our field who have a background in art, and I was just at our QM Connect conference last week talking with a poster presenter who is a graphic art professor, and we were talking about how so many people gravitate into like online education, digital learning from those fields. I think because it is challenging, it brings all of these pieces of their training kind of to bear, with problem solving, working within a limited time frame, a limited amount of resources, and what can you do with what you have, right? And I will admit, like, I was attracted to this session because I see the value of data. I use data, but I also am not a math person, right? That's why I have a degree in art. So there's so I think that there are people out there like me who can really see the value of, like, how do you really use data and how do you become fluent in using it? And even like with our membership, we tell them, like, you need to gather the data for today, right? To be able to determine if your QM certified courses or programs move the needle in some way in the future. And they don't always know what to look for. We don't have necessarily structures in our institutions that empower people and enable them to use the data, that pieces that are available across the institution, right? Like, we're data rich, but not, I think there's probably
Information poor.
Thank you. That's the rest of it. Thank you. So, but that's the thing that I think where that's kind of a confluence piece, I think, where we would be able to help expand and open up that kind of bottleneck to help people understand really how to use that information in ways that can, elevate our institutions and programs and student learning ultimately.
Absolutely. And Brenda, you bring up, you nudged me in my head when we're talking about data fluency, data literacy. One of the most foundational concepts that we need to impart to the consumers of our data as they take action on that data is and just say it again and again and again, the difference between correlation and causation, right? That it is easy to misinterpret the data as well. Other thoughts? Thank you, Brenda. All right, I'm going to ask each of our three panelists for some quick closing thoughts and maybe a takeaway that we can ponder on as we think about this critical need for data literacy and data fluency. And I would like to start with Simon.
Yeah, thank you. Listening to our conversation, I think it's really important to see the truth and the information we're pursuing as a moving target, right? And so the Heisenberg effect tells us that by observing something, we actually are changing it. It's very easy to see how data can do that when you try to pull a report on help desk, tickets being completed. And once people learn that that's what you're measuring, they're going to look for the easy tickets so that many of them will be completed, and therefore the data reports what you wanted to report. So I think that there is a lot to be said that it's a cycle, in that we have to measure things that really matter and understand that at the end people make that data. I also wanted to note, kind of at a higher level, that right now, and it's not just advent of AI, but just advent of maybe modern thinking on statistics. The modern statistics, or the statistics in general, were created in the early 1900s to prove things that today we're not very proud of. That was the time of eugenics and time of trying to prove things with numbers that were difficult and are difficult for today to understand. And that statistics as a science is really lacking. More than anything today, we want to take on Bayesian thinking, which basically means that you're going to update your beliefs, and any report and huge change needs to be evaluated so that you progressively are changing your mind. So I just wanted to share this book, Bernoulli's Fallacy by Aubrey Clayton, which is a really, really important publication today to understand that frequency statistics should be only a small part of our conversation about data, but Bayesian thinking, that may be, and that is how AI actually was created through Bayesian algorithms. that's really where we might be going with our next steps.
Great. Ellen, what are your thoughts?
Simon, thank you for that whole reminder, because this is, I think, a place where many of us in higher education are going to find ourselves being stuck for a while. This is making me think of, well, I actually have something I'm doing in a couple of weeks. I'm engaged in a debate in Europe, and we're going to be debating on whether or not we should be denying or not using student data in any, or that we should not collect any more student data. And of course, the position is an extreme one, but I've actually been I have a choice of whichever side I want to argue. And I'm finding myself on one hand saying, well, of course we have to just say, oh, don't be silly, that's a dumb thing to say. On the other hand, I'm almost taking the position right now saying that by looking at the data, we're doing the wrong thing, because if you tell people that we cannot use the data, then we're never going to be able to update our thinking on anything, because we won't see what's going on. And I think this is probably why you're hearing this reflection on my absolute, I'm not gobsmacked by it, but the need to be able to remember to bring the people along on this conversation, that I'm trying to figure out if I'm brave enough to actually take the position against the House and to explain why, because I'm not sure how much energy I really have to be able to put on that much perkiness to pull that off. I've been watching debate movies to see what I'm going to have to do to actually pull this off. But you all have really helped me quite a bit to really underscore that, the data themselves are really not the point. So our ability to live with what they can tell us really is. And I just really want to thank you all for helping me figure out how I was trying to figure out how to bridge a rather thorny little gap that I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do. And now I think I do. So thank you all for that.
Excellent. Pete, your thoughts?
How do I follow those two? I'm going to jump off of both of them. Early on, Ellen talked about human in the loop, right? This is, I think, how we're oftentimes phrasing this human versus algorithm question moving into the future. But as a qual researcher, I live in the knowledge that humans are messy. We bring behaviors and values and things like trust and collaboration and openness and activities that are messy in and of themselves. And one of the quotes I have on my wall as a qual researcher is, "The mess is the message." And so if that helps us think about what both Ellen and Simon said, I'm glad to add that. The messy human in the loop would be my final few words.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. And yes, we are indeed messy. I want to thank our panelists. This has been a really spirited and engaging debate. I learned stuff every time I talk to the smart people. I hope that the folks that were on here learned some things as well. Remember, the Hardy Group is there. If you'd like to shoot us a message about other topics you'd like to have a conversation like this about, we would love to hear it. We are going to turn these fireside chats into a repeated cycle. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.